slower.
Larry, what the hell are you doing?
Larry! Larry, you can't just... Oh,
Larry! Oh, are you all right? How did you...
Larry! Righto, what's going on here?
Oh, sir, I'm arrested. Oh, oh. Oh, arrest. Oh.
Well, I grew up in a Scotland where the decisions about our future are taken by the people who care most about Scotland, the people who live here.
Our goal is simple: a fairer country for all those born here, for those who have chosen to make this their home, and for the generations yet to come. That is why we believe in an independent Scotland. So know this, believe in this, work for this. Hope is possible. A better future is within our grasp. And together we are going to make it happen.
Tortured world of Brexit negotiations, even the Brexit Secretary was having to confirm this morning he's not going to be the next to walk out.
Are you going to resign?
Absolutely not, we'll negotiate.
So it was a full cabinet who trooped in to discuss Brexit this morning.
Confident of a deal, Mr Javid?
Where they agreed the absolute desirability of getting a deal this month, but not stress the Prime Minister at any cost.
We're always planning to get a deal, and the Prime Minister remains always optimistic, as I do, having heard further information today.
But in Europe, the mood music from the EU's chief Brexit negotiator was sounding a lot more moody.
We're not yet there, as I said previously, about this last part of the negotiation on the withdrawal agreement. We need an operational backstop for Ireland.
It's the Northern Ireland backstop, the insurance policy to avoid border checks here between the North and the Republic of Ireland, which is still the major stumbling block. The UK is hoping a proposal for a way of independently reviewing when that backstop will end could be a way to break the deadlock, although Dublin still has its caveats.
We're open to considering a review clause, but I've set out very clearly what that review clause could not contain. It could not contain an expiry date. It could not contain the unilateral ability of the UK to resile from its commitments in relation to there being no hard border.
And the potential cost of not coming to a deal was laid out today in South Wales and Devon, where 2 Schaeffler plants will lay off 500 staff, citing Brexit uncertainty as part of the cause. If the Prime Minister doesn't manage to grasp an agreement this month, many more firms say they'll push the button on no-deal plans, with more jobs at risk. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Demand a people's vote. We demand a people's vote. We demand a people's vote. We demand.
Good afternoon, London. It's really great to be in this yes voting city. And like you lot, Scotland voted to remain as well. And also, so did Northern Ireland. And despite the fact that I support Scottish independence, I want to see all the nations of the United Kingdom remain in the European Union. I like the European Union because it's a union of equals. This is in all our interests for us to stay in the European Union. I sit on the Brexit Select Committee at Parliament, and we've had 2 years of evidence. And it's quite clear from that evidence, overwhelming evidence, that it's in the interests of the economy across these islands and our society to remain in the European Union. I also just want to say a little something today about all the European Union citizens who live and work in the United Kingdom and who didn't get a vote. To say that those of us here today still very much care about you. We want you to remain here and to continue to make the huge contribution you do. As things stand, Scotland is looking at being taken out of the European Union against her will. So I'm very, very proud to tell you that my SNP colleagues and myself could not be clearer that when we know what Brexit looks like, we will support a people's vote with the option to remain.
A people's vote. We demand a people's vote. We demand a people's vote.
Ian Blackford, MP, you're the leader of the Scottish National Party in Westminster. What are you hoping for next in these discussions? Will there be a meaningful vote?
Well, there must be a meaningful vote, and our primary interest is to make sure we can protect the interests of the Scottish people. We don't like the fact that Brexit is taking place, and we continually point out that Scotland voted to stay within the European Union. But principally what we're arguing for is the least worst option. There is no good option, but the least worst option is to make sure that we stay in the single market and the customs union. We have to be clear that being out with the single market, out with the customs union, will be an economic catastrophe. All the economic analysis that's been produced indicates the potential of losing up to 80,000 jobs in Scotland if that's what takes place, that people on average will be £2,300 a year worse off. That is a price that is not worth paying. So we've an enormous obligation over the course of the next few weeks is to make sure that we can bring forward that case, make sure we have a meaningful vote in Parliament, and make sure the option of staying in the single market and the customs union is on the table. We have a responsibility to defend the interests of our constituents. We're now going into what is a critical phase. We have to make sure we can win this battle.
You're here today in Brussels to meet with Michel Barnier. Do you think that the Commission will be, and the EU27, are open for a solution that is different for Scotland, not just Northern Ireland, but also different for Scotland in any future arrangement?
Well, of course, there are very clear reasons as to why the interests of the people of Northern Ireland must be protected. We must support the Good Friday Agreement and the delivery of that. But notwithstanding that, if there can be a differentiated deal for Northern Ireland, then it makes the point then we can do the same for Scotland. Scotland has spoken with a very clear voice. We are European, we're European citizens. We want to make sure we can maintain our trade and our customs arrangement. The United Kingdom should respect our position and should make sure that that is part of the negotiations. The Scottish Government, as an elected government, should be represented in those talks.
And in the scenario where the UK does stay outside the customs union, does stay out, sticks to its red lines, being out of single market, no European Court of Just jurisdiction, where does the SNP stand then? What do you do if that happens?
Well, one thing at a time, because what we're trying to do is to protect the interests of the people of Scotland and the United Kingdom by staying in the single market and the customs union. When the SNP were re-elected to government in Edinburgh in 2016, we did have a manifesto commitment. If there was a material change of circumstances, we would have the right to go back to the people of Scotland to ask them to determine their own future. Our First Minister has said, once we know the destination of Brexit, then we will have a conversation as to what options the people of Scotland have. I think everyone realises and appreciates that the Scottish National Party wants to see an independent Scotland as part of the family nations in Europe, but we will reflect on the circumstances once we know what's happening with Brexit.
Well, the leadership bids come amid calls from the SNP and Labour to unite in a progressive alliance against Brexit. We spoke to the SNP's Angus MacNeil, who said when it comes to Brexit and the budget, the government is between a rock and a hard place.
Anybody who looks at the history of austerity will see that, in fact, there's a book, Austerity, the History of a Dangerous Idea. And basically, austerity goes with the fashions. It never sorts anything economically. It plays to some sort of gut instinct about morals and cash, but it actually doesn't work economically. Austerity has been a failure, but unfortunately, the Chancellor is actually still continuing with austerity. We're not seeing the spending we're needing to see to prime the economy, especially as we come forward to Brexit. And what we are seeing are countries nearby, smaller independent countries like Ireland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, where the crash of 2008 is history. Given the figures unveiled today by the Chancellor, austerity is actually going to continue in the United Kingdom up till 2024. So that's going to be 16 years of austerity. We will not be voting for any bad deal that Theresa May is going to come back with, and we simply have to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves with the choice between bad Brexit and blind Brexit, the any deal Brexit of Theresa May's. Theresa May's got herself into a corner at the moment. She's in huge difficulty with the European Union, with where she's taking the UK to. It's either going to be a bad deal or a very bad deal. It's either going to be whatever they give her, or it's going to be a WTO. And that means that all countries will be charging their exports at their WTO highest tariffs. So that is a bad situation for the UK to be in, and that is why we can't be supporting any of these bad deals that Theresa May might come back with. Given the economic forecast, given the damage that a no-deal Brexit is meant to do to the economy, Philip Hammond has left himself room, recognising that this will be a damaging event, to have an emergency budget. This is the seriousness of the UK, and this is really where Philip Hammond actually is, apart from the dwelling on the fantasies of his own speech today. The reality was actually given in places there where he's left himself the room for this emergency budget. And also, he was telling that he said that austerity wasn't ideological. Why he chose that word is maybe some sort of Freudian slip.
The Westminster establishment has some serious soul-searching to do, and I hope very much that it now does it. But as First Minister of Scotland, I have a duty to respond not just to the outcome across the UK, but also and in particular to the democratic decision taken by the people of Scotland. As things stand, Scotland faces the prospect of being taken out of the EU against our will. I regard that as democratically unacceptable. The manifesto that the SNP was elected on last month said this: the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. Scotland does now face that prospect. It is a significant and material change in circumstances, and it is therefore a statement of the obvious that the option of a second referendum must be on the table, and it is on the table.
Well, let's turn to Brexit, because despite some optimism in Brussels and London, a deal is still not certain. DUP leader Arlene Foster and SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, they're both setting out their stalls in the negotiation trade-off. Let's get the latest now with the Brexit brief. Keeping the dream alive. Just days after tens of thousands took to the streets of Edinburgh in a show of support for Scottish independence, Nicola Sturgeon takes to the stage of the Scottish National Party conference in Glasgow. Going into the conference, the SNP leader once again raised the prospect of independence, contrasting it with political deadlock in Westminster. Meanwhile, the leader of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party is in Brussels this week for 3 days of Brexit talks. Arlene Foster is meeting with Michel Barnier and representatives of EU member states. There's hope of a compromise on the Irish border. A breakthrough there would clear one of the last obstacles to a Brexit deal. Back in London, a boost for Theresa May. The percentage of Brits who have confidence in Theresa May's ability to get the right Brexit deal is up by 22% from last month and since her speech at the Tory conference. That's according to a poll by ORB International. Although a slim majority still thinks she won't deliver. The British public is perhaps hoping that May's famed fancy footwork can clinch a Brexit deal. Darren, you've been doing the rounds here in Brussels. I mean, should we be optimistic? What's going on?
Well, it's really interesting. I think the mood music that we saw at the weekend from people like Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, I think was a bit of political game playing by the European Union, almost to put the pressure back on Theresa May in order to try and mean that if there was no deal, it would be, of course, her fault. I think interesting today we saw the DUP leader, Arlene Foster, here in this Parliament, where she gave a press conference and reiterated her red line, as she put it, that there should be no border in the Irish Sea, separating Great Britain from Northern Ireland. Her point is that she does not want to see any extra checks. Now, there had been a thought process that we're going to see an alternative plan on this issue of the Irish border from the British government in the next couple of days. There are now rumours that that might not happen because ultimately the DUP, bizarrely, even though they only represent 30% of the people in Northern Ireland, even though Northern Ireland as a whole voted to remain inside the EU, if they do not like this deal, they have got the votes in the British House of Commons to essentially dump any deal that Theresa May signs with Michel Barnier, and that's why they matter. And as for Scotland, clearly one politician's problem is another's opportunity, and Nicola Sturgeon clearly views this as a chance to ramp up the independence argument. Though there were a whole series of opinion polls at the weekend, it still shows that if there was a referendum tomorrow, for example, independence would not pass, but if there was no deal when it comes to Brexit, it might just do. So that's how big the stakes are for the British government.
I'll go to Nina, because you said you had an idea on who's going to blink first. I'd like to know.
Well, I think as is consistently proven to be the case in the past 2 years of negotiations, when you pit one against 27, the 27 tend to win. So I think the UK will blink first. I mean, but I have to agree with what Darren is saying, despite, you know, all the will they, won't they, no deal kind of talk. I think we're edging closer to a deal because fundamentally, ultimately, it is in everyone's interest to strike a deal. And one of the biggest sticking points in the talks, that's the question of the Irish border. If there is no deal, that is not resolved. So I think where we're heading really is towards the position where the UK kind of remains in the customs union.
Yeah, so you call the bluff of Theresa May. She said, oh, we're going to leave, but actually, no. She's just,
yeah, and I think
right,
people talk about, and it's a natural thing to say that, of course, it is in everyone's interest to get a deal. Economically, Britain would be damaged, the EU would be damaged. But Brexit, in its sense, was people voting against their economic self-interest to a degree. And there are people perfectly willing to say we do not want a deal if it's not a good deal, even if, again, it does Britain or indeed the EU more damage. So, you know, it's still really difficult to judge.
And this discussion's not over because the whole week is about Brexit. All right, we have a lot more coming up on Raw Politics.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to FINS 2018. As Jerry said, there's a big team of us that have worked on this project, and we were intending that Wendy was going to present some of this, but frankly all the fault was mine because we didn't get as far on as we wanted, and so we're not able to present all of the analysis that Wendy has done, so I'm going to present the bit that we are able to present today. So, in essence, we're going to present some of the preliminary results today of a large systematic review of international mortality inequality trends. Okay, so the background to this. Health inequalities in Scotland are known to be wider than in the rest of Western and Central Europe. So I'll just illustrate that quickly. So this is relative index of inequality, so relative inequalities in mortality for men across Europe. There's Scotland there. So you can see that Scotland has one of the higher rates, and indeed you need to go to, let me just put on the cursor, I should have done this before I started. You have to go to Hungary or the Czech Republic to find relative inequalities that are higher than in Scotland. A very similar picture for women. Again, there's Scotland there, but in fact, the relative mortality inequalities for women are higher than even in Eastern Europe, as you can see. So Scotland has a huge problem with health inequalities, and therefore it's rightly a policy priority here. So, in order to inform the policy processes in Scotland and beyond, it's really important we understand which nations have experienced improvements or worsenings in their health inequality trends, and then understand what are the causal factors underlying those trends so that we can inform policy and practice. So this particular study aimed to describe those trends in inequalities in mortality and life expectancy amongst adults in high and upper middle income countries across a range of measures of socioeconomic position. So that means ranking people by social class or educational attainment or income, area deprivation. And then to examine how those mortality inequalities relate to a range of socioeconomic exposures and political exposures at the national level. I'm going to tell you a bit about the methods just because there are so many studies in this area that could potentially be included, so we had to narrow it down. So we did take a systematic review approach, which, as Julie Arnott, our Knowledge Services expert, will tell you was a very, very comprehensive search of a whole range of databases and the grey literature. We then included studies that looked at all-cause mortality, so I'm not going to talk about cause-specific mortality nor well-being or other measures of health, so just mortality and all-cause mortality at that, but also including life expectancy and survival. We only included countries with a population of greater than 1 million inhabitants, so you will not see any data at all for Liechtenstein. And in 2010, we defined countries as either high income or upper middle income. That encompasses most countries who have data, to be fair, on this, but obviously the results are more generalisable to Scotland from that kind of cohort of countries. We were quite happy to take data ranked by area deprivation, educational attainment, social class, occupation, income or wealth, or indeed parental education, parental social class, etc., for longitudinal studies. We also needed to have enough data within the studies to be able to calculate something called the relative index of inequality or the slope index of inequality, and I'll tell you a wee bit about that in a second. So that also meant that some studies had to be excluded for that reason. We also excluded studies that didn't attempt to be representative of the host population. So the studies I'm going to show you are fairly representative of the country that it's pertaining to. We excluded studies looking at only children and young people, and where the ranking of socioeconomic position is not possible. So, for example, in some countries, there's a lot of studies looking at ethnic differences in health, but of course ethnicity isn't rankable, and so we weren't able to include that as a measure of health inequalities as we've defined here. We also excluded studies that were over-adjusted, so if they showed an inequality in health but then adjusted for things like self-rated health, that was seen as over-adjustment for our purposes. We didn't want to explain those inequalities by individual level factors. We did a critical appraisal of all the studies using something called the modified Hamilton tool, really looking for sources of bias, and then we calculated the SII and the RII. So just to rehearse that, so this is some data from Scotland in 2015. As you can expect, the mortality rates in the least deprived areas are much less than those in the most deprived areas. To calculate this, you put a best fit regression line across that, and how steep that slope is tells you how bad the inequalities are. To calculate the SII, you look at the top and the bottom of that slope, and that is your SII. So in this case, it would be about 600 deaths per 100,000 per year. To calculate the RII, you have to look at the ratio, or how many times worse the bottom is from the top, and then divide by the average. It's a bit of an arithmetical thing. We do that to take account of secular trends in countries, so that over time, as countries improve or get worse in terms of their overall life expectancy or mortality, we can account for that in the measure. So to do that, you take the average across the whole population, you get that average, you divide one by the other, and in this case it gives you 1.33. So that's the two measures I'm going to focus on throughout this presentation. In terms of the exposures data, we looked at a wide range of different aspects of social and political exposure. So welfare state is really important, and how generous the welfare state is. We know that, and we wanted to include that in our analysis. We looked at Human Freedoms Index, a sort of measure of the actuality of human rights, the Gender Inequalities Index, the Index of Economic Freedom, which is really about how liberal the market is in a country. We looked at measures of democracy, and then also measures of public spending on health and social security. And then we also included a number of economic measures, GDP per capita and income inequality. Okay, so results. Well, we found over 17,000 citations which came up in our searches. Of that, we narrowed it down to 247 studies that we included, but that, fortunately or unfortunately, resulted in 3,106 individual data points, which is just a vast amount of data, and so that's why we've not finished this project yet, and I'm just going to present you some of these interim results. The other problem we've got by having so much data is that there's so many different ways of cutting the data up and exploring it. So you can look separately for men and for women, or for the total population. You can look at relative inequalities or absolute inequalities, i.e. the RII or the SII. You can look at life expectancy, survival and mortality, and you can't really merge these things easily. And then there's all the different measures of socioeconomic position, so class, education, etc., etc. Furthermore, it's further complicated by the fact that inequalities in health tend to vary by age, so they tend to be higher amongst young working age adults, and they get smaller as you get towards the extremes of age. So none of these can be directly compared. So there are so many results I need to focus on. So I'm going to start by talking really about male mortality, relative index of inequality by educational attainment, and I'm going to focus on those results mostly because that's where most of the results are. I'm going to show you a lot of data quite quickly now. Don't get scared, I'll talk you through it. So that is all the data for men, for all ages, by educational attainment. The results obviously are really clear to everybody, yeah? You all know what's going on. So, the higher up this scale you are, the worse it is. So the higher the relative inequalities, the lower, the better. Along the bottom is time. So we've got from 1960 to 2020 here, and I'll keep these axes the same throughout this. So, a few things to note. This is an example of a single study that shows 3 or 4 data points by age group. And that's just highlighted there to illustrate that. That's your young working age, that's late working age, and that's retirement age. And you see that inequalities vary across the life course. And you see that a lot with studies. So there's quite a lot there, around the mid-2000s, again, just showing different age groups in the populations. As you go on, we get more data. So there's very little data prior to 1980 available, but from 1990 onwards, we've just got a vast array of data for a vast array of countries. And there's also a general trend that taking all of these countries and all the data together, in general, inequalities seem to be going up on this measure. But let's get into it in a bit more detail. So this, I've just taken out the point data, so this is now only the trends data that are available. You can see that we've lost a lot from the last slide. And then if we take the higher quality studies only, so there's a lot of studies in there where there's a really high risk of bias. So again, that reduces our numbers down quite vastly. And then if I just show you the stable and improving trends, well, suddenly the graph becomes much, much clearer, because unfortunately, we don't have so many examples of relative inequalities improving, but we do have some. So our countries here are Finland, Denmark, France, some parts of the USA, England, Wales, Sweden, Denmark. Now, some of these results aren't particularly spectacular, so it's more just a bit of a flat line for 5 or 10 years. But for some of them, we do have good examples of an improvement. So I'm going to talk you through some of those improvements later on in the talk. But before I do that, I just want to show you some of the data for females. So again, this is female mortality, relative index of inequality by education. So again, there's all the data, the messy data set that I showed you about, very similar trends to men. So usually most of these studies have got male and female data included within them. Again, if we just show you the trends data, that cuts out a lot. And if you take out just the higher quality studies, again, much fewer studies available. So I'm just going to show you some selected examples of worsening trends here. We've got so many examples of trends that are getting worse on this measure that I would be there all day trying to explain them. So just to take some concrete examples. So there's Estonia, Hungary and New Zealand. And I will talk you through some of those, the causal pathways for those later on. So, if we turn now to trying to explain some of these trends, again, these results are very preliminary. I just want to make that point again. So we will do, well, I say we, Alistair Leyland will do some multi-level modelling for us on this once we've got the data set entirely clean for all of these measures. But one of the problems we've had is that the data set is so very messy. So we've got all these different trends by age, socioeconomic position, and then there's lots of missing data for both our outcomes measures and our exposures too. So, just again, illustrative case studies here. So I'm going to use Estonia as an example of Eastern Europe. We're fairly confident that inequalities and mortality across much of Eastern Europe increased during the 1990s. So I'll use that as an example. And then I want to use Finland and France as examples of long, high-quality data sets which have had periods of improvement, and just to give some illustration about some of the factors that may lie behind that improvement in relative inequalities. So I've just pulled out those 3 lines. So there's France in blue, Finland in red here, and then Estonia. So you can see that relative inequalities For France, by occupational social class between the 1970s and the early 1990s, improved for sort of working age men. Similar picture for Finland, working age men between 1970 and about 1985. Again, quite a substantial improvement in the relative index of inequality. And there's an example of Eastern Europe. We could have used just about any country in Eastern Europe, to be honest, over that time period. But that's Estonia for working age men between, I think it's 1989 and 2001. Quite a marked rise in inequalities. So, first of all, I want to talk about income inequality. The good thing about our income inequality data sets is they're very complete. They go back a long, long way. So I'm more certain about these results than I am for some of the others. So there's the income inequality graph for Finland. So higher up this scale is more unequal, lower down this scale is more equal. In theory, it runs from 0 to 100, but it's almost impossible to get values that are that extreme. The most unequal countries in the world are about 50 or 60, so places like Brazil and some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The most equal countries in the world are about 20. So you can see that Finland is a relatively equal country over the whole time series, but there was a marked improvement in the 1960s, 70s, flatlined in the 1980s, and then increased slightly thereafter. So what's of relevance here is those two time periods that I've highlighted. So at the same time as the relative index of inequality for mortality improves and gets narrower through the 1970s and the early 1980s, that's the same period where income inequalities have also improved in Finland. So that's some good evidence that these two may be related. That's strengthened by the fact that if you take France, again, their income inequalities are higher throughout the whole time period, sitting between 30 and 35, fairly flat until about 1983 or 4, which I think is roughly when Francois Mitterrand came into power, declined slightly thereafter and then was stable. So again, if you look at that time period, it corresponds with the decline in mortality inequalities in France. You see a decline in income inequalities overall with a blip in the middle. So again, it's a suggestion that the two may be related. Then finally, to look at Estonia. So we don't have such a long time series for Estonia. It was part of the USSR prior to that. But again, you can see a marked rise in income inequalities to become the highest of these three examples. And again, that rise in income inequalities corresponds to the rise in health inequalities over the same time period. So we think that income inequality probably is a good predictor and a good cause of health inequalities. And it works both ways. So an improvement in income inequalities seems to lead to an improvement in health inequalities and vice versa. Okay, to look at the next set of data. So I'm going to look at an index of democracy. This is a less complete data set. So it's based on the Polity 2 index. Just show you the data. So 10 here is very democratic. 1 is very undemocratic. You can see that Finland throughout this time period was very democratic. France, which may surprise some of you, I had to go back and check the history here, was actually fairly undemocratic post-World War II. It didn't have a free press. There was various sort of fairly militaristic leaders for a long period of time, but obviously their democracy improved over time. Still not reaching the heady heights of Finland, though. When will it ever be like Scandinavia, I hear you ask? And then Estonia, again, fairly undemocratic in the early 1990s and improving thereafter. So again, to try and look at the trends, so that time period of France becoming more democratic corresponds to the same time period of France becoming less unequal in terms of its mortality. For Estonia, again, pretty unclear here, so very undemocratic at the start of the time series. The change doesn't really happen until after the mortality inequalities have happened. So again, can be, it's not out of keeping with the idea that better democracy improves health inequalities. And then for Finland, they've just been very democratic throughout, and perhaps just having that sustained democratic society could contribute to better health inequalities. Okay, the last example I'm going to give you is about economic freedoms. This is about how marketised the economy is. So there's the data for 3 example countries again. So in this example, 10 is more marketised, so a more free market system. 1 would be a sort of communist state, if you like. So again, during this period here that France has, we don't have the whole data series. So again, we've got a lot of missing data in terms of our exposures. But for the period we do have, France has a fairly heavily regulated market, and that seems to correspond to a time when health inequalities are narrowing. For Estonia, we've got a very short time series, it's very difficult to say very much about that. But for Finland, again, we're missing a lot of the early time series that would be of interest, but what we have got does suggest that a more regulated market does seem to be correlated with an improvement in health inequalities. These results are all very tentative, and once we give the data to Alistair to do the multi-level modelling, we'll be much more certain about whether these trends are real and whether there is a causal relationship. But hopefully that gives some illustration at the moment. So to summarise what's said, health inequalities are greatest for young adults and for men compared to women. There's been large increases in health inequalities in many nations during the 1980s and 1990s, but it's not true to say that nowhere declines. So some people have claimed in the academic literature recently that relative inequalities are just not worth tackling because they will never be reduced. What I've shown today is actually quite a number of countries have shown a decline in relative inequalities, so therefore it is possible given the right social and political context. There are lots of caveats to these data though. So we do see divergent trends for different measures of socioeconomic position. So for example, one measure of socioeconomic inequalities and mortality for class might go in a different direction than it might for educational attainment. And that's quite problematic as we're trying to explain these in a sort of coherent way. It's also true that the quality of the data really matters. So the more biased data often goes in a completely different direction from the better quality data. But our earlier analysis does suggest that income inequality, democracy and market regulation are important. So our next steps is that multi-level modelling that I've suggested. We will also do case studies of countries, trying to pull together all the health inequalities data for that country, and then looking at the social and political backdrop to that, and particularly focusing on what policy mixes are the most effective and ineffective at reducing inequalities in health. And then we also want to understand much better why the different measures of socioeconomic position diverge. Do they measure some sort of different class and social process going on in society? And then, of course, we've still got our quality checks to do, but we will make this data set widely available for others to analyse as well. So I'd just like to thank all my co-authors, so Wendy, Vital, David, Erin, Julie and Alistair. If you do want more information, just email me or send me a direct message on Twitter. If you want to see more about the protocol, it's registered at University of York in the CRD Centre, and all the details of the analysis that we've got planned are listed there. Thank you very much.
I have formally triggered Article 50 and begun the process through which the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. This will be a defining moment for our whole country as we begin to forge a new relationship with Europe and a new role for ourselves in the world.
This gangway is very, very well organised. What they do... Get me a ladder.
I don't know if you can see changes that have come over me in this few days. I've been afraid that I might drift away, so I'm telling stories, singing songs which made me think about where I come from. That's the reason what I've seen so far away today. Let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, I'm going home. If I should become a stranger, you know, it will make me more than sad. Caledonia, you've been everything I ever had. Now I moved and kept on moving through the points that I needed proving. Lost the friends I needed losing. I knew I was on the way. I kissed the ladies, left some crying, stolen dreams, yet there's no denying. I'm tripping hard with causes flying, somewhere in the wind. Let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, I'm going home. If I should become a stranger, you know, it will make me more than sad. Caledonia, you've been everything I ever had. I'm sitting here before the fire, the empty room, the father's quiet, the flames that could be cannot higher, they ridden out, they're gone. But I'm steady thinking, my way is clear, and I will know what I do tomorrow. When the hands are shaking and kisses flow, then I will disappear. So let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home. If I should become a stranger, you know, it will make me more than sad. Caledonia, you've been everything I ever had.
Now playing. We is sure dedicated, Marty.
Marty, while you are an angel in my villain's heart, Marty, that makes you a common devil, hoisted on your own petard. Marty, while you're solving puzzles, chewing pencils, cracking heads, someone's laying bricks down for the foundation in the cold mud of the ravine that splits our land. All I had to give does magnetize. Listen to the record. Oh, my thought-worn squiggle in the tracks. Listen to the record. Marty, if they ask you what it means, listen to the record. And it's like I never left. You can live and breathe and give. Listen to the record. Cops around your collar, they have the power. Well, I know what it takes, Lord, I know what it takes. You've been arrested, lynched and molested. Well, I know what's in store, I know what's in store. There's a sale on party favors and you're that pinata, but I'll hit the bottle instead. On the valley floor, still trapped on a valley floor. Released by severed paw, released by severed paw, released by severed paw. World death, but you're still singing. World death, but you're still singing. Released by severed paw, released by severed paw, released by severed paw. All I had to give does magnetize. Listen to the record. All my thought wants squiggle in the track. Listen to the record. Marty, if they ask you what it means, listen to the record. And it's like I never left. You can live and breathe and give. Listen to the
Playing now. Brian Boyko, folk song. Next up is Morgan Grieve, Damaged Goods.
That's what it feels like when you're broke down. When you're broke down, you can't be fixed. And all the women in the neighborhood, they say you're damaged. They say they go damaged. There goes damaged goods. Carmelita, are you leaving me too? I come home after a long, long day to find another big yellow truck driving away. But that's what it feels like when you're broke down. Well, when you're broke down, you can't be fixed. And all the women in the neighborhood, they say you're damaged. They say they go damaged. They go damaged goods. Those old women, you say, what do they know? You think you're in love because you couldn't keep your hands off of me at the dog show. But to be honest with you, if I could, I'd leave me too. 'Cause that's what it feels like when you're broke down. When you're broke down, you cannot be fixed. And all the women in the neighborhood, they say you're damaged. They say they go damaged. They go damaged too.
You're listening to Independent TV and Radio Scotland. Channel Radio ICE.
Playing now. Fallen Angels, Footsteps.
What is this in my eyes? Your stick of running. all illuminations. Realize tomorrow will not be a perfect day, but I just want to tell you that moment was beautiful. Should I just stay for the sunset, if not for me? For the sunset, if not, peace you can give me is the only thing I need. Is the only thing I need. Is the only thing I need. Peace you can give me is the only thing I need. Is the only thing I need. Is the only thing I for the sunset.
I got an old Harley that I don't ride. She's covered with a tarp.
Next up is Steve Blackley, Notion for Motion.
But she ain't for sale. She's still my pride. Every once in a while, I roll her out. She's such a pretty bike, it makes me wanna shout. A pretty motorcycle out and what it's all about. And when I look at her, oh, there ain't no doubt that one of these days I get the notion to fill her up with gas and put her wheels in motion. I'll leave one morning wakes up, I'll be long, long gone. People always telling me that I'm too old to straddle my old Harley and hit the road. And it might be right, but brother, I'm not sold. And when I'm long gone, I don't say you weren't told. That one of these days, well, I get the notion to fill her up with gas and put her wheels in motion. I'll leave one morning in the early dawn, and when the world wakes up, well, I'll be long, long gone. Every dog has a day, and I had mine. Filled her up with gas and got the engine primed. And she fired right up when she was kicked the first time. And I waved goodbye at that city limit sign. 'Cause I had the day when I got that notion. I filled her up with gas and put her wheels in motion. I left this morning in the early dawn, and when the world woke up, well, I was long, long gone. You see my taillights, you see them. I had the day when I got the notion. I filled her up with gas and put her wheels in motion. I left this morning in the early dawn, and when the world woke up, well, I was long, long gone. I had the day when I got the notion. I filled her up with gas and put her wheels in motion. I left this morning in the early dawn, and when the world woke up, well, I was long, long gone.
Track playing now. Manny the Martyr, Be That Way.
People wandering by, and I'm thinking that they all look the same. Spending entire lives blending in, and I think it's such a shame. All in speaking, sometimes tweaking their lives away. Whoa. Sometimes cursing, some reversing, but somebody's got to step up and say, yeah, losing sight or compromising it. Oh, it's to blame, yeah. Take a chance or second glance. It don't have to be this way. Yeah. Crowded streets as I walk at night, but the city feels asleep. Everyone is on their Bluetooth sets and staring at their feet. Whatever happened to the world we love, or to the world we know? It seems uncertain where we're going, but I do
or second glance. It don't have to be this way. Or compromising, yeah. Who is to blame? Yeah, hey. Take a chance or just second glance. It don't have to be this way.
Now playing Snowflake, a foolish game.
Do you ever feel the same? Well, maybe we could change, turn the ship another way. Feel it in the darkness, sailing right into those jagged cliffs. Yeah. Some say we've always been insane. Hey, life's a foolish game. Simple equation, running closed system. Natural world gone missing, plus all our CO2 emissions equals degradation, wasting ships and mass extinctions. Oh no. But maybe we can change, we sure can't stay the same, 'cause life's a foolish, foolish game. Solution, rewire our connection, maybe less consumption, imagine from a mind of isolation, revalue all that we've been given. God don't work on commission. We make up one big breathing chain, we're quite the same. Hey, life's a foolish, foolish game. Ba foolish game? Do you ever feel the same? Well, maybe we could change and turn the ship another way. Take less than we've been given if we move in that direction. Yeah. We'll find our place in this living chain. We're quite the same. Yeah, life's a foolish, foolish game. Life's a foolish game. Hey, life's a foolish game. Life's a foolish game.
The coolest radio station in the world, Radio Ice, from Independent TV and Radio Scotland.
Next we have Steve Blakely, Modern Cowboys of Today.
Who do you see riding across the USA? Well, who camps out on the open range and who stays warm by the campfire flames, drinking their whiskey straight from the jug, shooting their guns because it's the life that they love? Well, tell me, who are the modern cowboys of today? The cowboy had a code to protect his own, and wherever the cowboy camped was a cowboy's home. Who still sleeps with a gun in his hand and who's still ready to take a stand? Who'd rather die in the dead of night than to lose his gear without giving a fight? Well, tell me, who are the modern cowboys of today? The cowboy loved his horse more than his lady true. Well, who loves today in the way that they used to do? They wear rawhide gloves and some even chaps. They ride iron horses with bags and packs, and you call them outlaws that don't belong. They're wild and crazy, full of fire and fun. But tell me, who are the modern cowboys of today? Just like the rebels, they'll all be history. Tell me, who are the modern cowboys of today? And who do you see riding across the USA?
Next up is Cortez, BD.
Body's intact. You've thrown me off track, and now there's no going back. Yeah, feels good lying next to you in this bed. Tried to leave, but I just came back instead. Eyes rolling to the back of your head, burning up, my body's turning red. But how'd I tell Waking up in your room feels like I'm home, but you are no good, so I can't be the one. No, feels good to put you out of my head, 'cause I'm not like you, I can't pretend. Oh, I wonder how I wanna never leave this bed, 'cause you carved your face inside of my head.
Now playing. Josh Woodward, Learn to Fly.
A sticky summer's day in Shepherdstown, and Eagle in a thermal as a circle around like a tire on a bike rolling down Columbus Street. But Katie got a little look of hope in her eyes, and her arms unfold, and she looked to the skies and said, I'm gonna learn to fly around with you, yeah. She jumped up high and she fell to the ground and skinned her little knee and made a horrible sound. She got right up and she tried it again, and smiling all the way with her unstoppable grin. Take time, do what you're gonna do, and just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and lift you off the ground. Oh no, take time, do what you're gonna do, just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and you will learn to fly. All the other children used to laugh at her. They say your hair's in the clouds, and when you come back to earth, the men in the white coats, they will all be waiting for you. But Katie knew that there was something they didn't see, and she climbed up to the top of the sycamore tree and said, look out world, I am gonna fly away. She stood so tall, and with all her might she took a flying leap of an astonishing height. A wind blew through and it carried her high, and Katie knew that she was just beginning to fly. Well, take time, do what you're gonna do, and just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and lift you off the ground. Oh no, take time, do what you're gonna do, just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and you will learn to fly. do what you're gonna do. Just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and you will learn to fly. Well, take time, do what you're gonna do, and just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and lift you off the ground. No, no, well, take time, do what you're gonna do. Just smile, you're gonna see it through. Your wings are gonna sprout and you will learn to fly.
Playing now. Ino Toivonen, The Gondolas plays pop.
You're listening to Independent TV and Radio Scotland, Channel Radio Ice.
Next up is Rudy Roger, Purple Maze. Next up is Axel Antunes, Better Eyes.
Somewhere in the light, living with joy and delight, never die. Somehow, never
season you can choose. Run like a winter wind. And take all your time to remember this could take all night. It'll take all the time to remember there are better eyes.
Playing now. Sunrise Boulevard, Felon. Now keep falling in and out of love. Keep falling out until you're alive. You got me on your mind. You got me on your mind. Now keep falling in and out of love. Keep falling out until you're alive. You got me on your mind. 'Cause all I see is you, all I see is you. 'Cause all I see is you, all I see is you.
You burned me one time, but now my fire's twice as bright. I learned that one time to take it all in stride. And from that first time, I played between the lines. You hurt me one time, but it won't happen twice.